When I woke up in a hospital bed with 24 missed calls flashing on my phone, none of them asked if I was alive. Not one said, "Are you okay, Nissa?" They were angry voicemails about embarrassment, about appearances, about how my collapse had made the family look bad. My name is Nissa Harrington, and in that moment, I realized the worst wound wasn't losing my leg in Afghanistan. It was realizing I'd come home invisible to the very people who were supposed to love me. The terminal was buzzing with cheers and hand-painted signs, kids racing into their father's arms, wives crying against their husbands' shoulders. "Welcome home, hero!" Banners waved like the air itself was celebrating. I stood off to the side, my duffel heavy against my hip, the carbon fiber leg rubbing raw at the seam. My phone buzzed once in my pocket. It wasn't my mother's voice telling me she was on her way. It was a short text. "Sent you the Uber code. We're at the preservation gala. Don't make a scene." So I rolled my bag to the curb, climbed into a stranger's car, and let him drive me past the old iron gates and Spanish moss that had once meant home. When the car pulled away, I was left in front of the carriage house that had belonged to my grandmother, the only place I thought I'd find comfort. Instead, I opened the door to a showroom, fake orchids on the counter, white slipcovers pulled tight across the chairs, a glossy sign on the lawn reading, "For sale, historic charm." Even my refuge had been staged for someone else. I tried to shower the travel off me, but the heat and pain in my stump blurred into a sharp spike that dropped me to the cold tile. The world tilted. My hand clawed at nothing, and then everything went black. When I came to, it was under fluorescent light, the antiseptic sting of a hospital surrounding me. My phone lay on the tray table, lit with a wall of missed calls, dozens stacked like accusations. My thumb hit play on the latest voicemail. My mother's voice spilled out, not trembling with worry, but sharp, shrill. "Nissa, what on earth are you doing? The neighbors saw the ambulance. Do you know how that looks? You're making us look irresponsible. Call me back immediately." No, "Are you okay?" No, "Are you alive?" Just fury about appearances. Lying there with the monitors beeping steady beside me, I understood with a clarity that cut deeper than the pain in my body. To them, I wasn't a daughter who had come home from war. I was a liability, a crack in the perfect picture they'd built. A problem to be managed, not a person to be loved. Morning slid through the carriage house like a stranger, catching on white slipcovers and fake orchids that still smelled like plastic. A framed photo of our smiling family sat on the table, angled just so, as if the room were waiting for a buyer, not its owner. I patted over on my prosthetic and found a stack of glossy flyers tucked beneath the vase. My uniform stared back at me, chin up, medals neat. Next to a slogan in bold, "The Harringtons, serving the community from the battlefield to the historic district." My throat tightened. I had never signed a release. I had never even been asked. While I lay under hospital lights the night before, they'd been at a gala bragging about our veteran daughter, passing my face around the room like a donor perk. Rage hit clean and sudden, the kind that leaves no room for tears. The house was staged, my image was staged, and apparently so was our family's conscience. In that moment, the furniture wasn't the only thing arranged. My life was being arranged without me. A day after discharge, I sat in a quiet corner of the VA with a paper cup of coffee cooling in my hands and opened an email from my father's law firm. Attached, a draft petition for guardianship. They were preparing to claim I was mentally unstable, PTSD, impaired judgment, risk to financial welfare, to secure control of my VA benefits and my disability compensation. My fingers shook over the screen. The words blurred into old memories. The broken arm they left to make a little league game. The scholarship they called a relief on the budget. I'd been a line item my whole life. I looked up at the pane of glass framing the Cooper River Bridge, steel sweeping from shore to shore. Something inside me gave way with a quiet snap. Whatever held me loyal out of habit had broken. They weren't protecting me. They were moving me like a piece on their board. And if they wanted my future, they'd have to fight me in the open. The studio was no bigger than a closet. Foam on the walls, a single gold bulb, one mic between us. The host, a Marine vet with a steady voice, nodded for me to start. I told it straight. The Uber code at the airport, the showroom they turned my grandmother's carriage house into, the collapse on the bathroom tile, the email arguing I was too unstable to handle my own life. My voice shook at first, then found its footing. When we wrapped, he squeezed my elbow and said, "You did right." By evening, comments flooded in. Women who'd served, neighbors who'd heard the sirens, strangers typing, "We see you." A hashtag took on a life of its own. Stand with Nissa. For one breath, it felt like oxygen. The next morning, Miles posted a sun-splashed family photo from a Hawaii trip. Everyone tan, matching linen. Caption: "Family is everything. Shares, hearts, praise from his donors." Then a video from my mother, filmed in a pew under stained glass. Tearful voice pleading for prayers because her daughter was unwell and lashing out. The comments flipped hard. At church, I got polite nods with eyes that slid away. In the grocery line, a whisper. That unstable vet. By dusk, the town's verdict was in. They had a narrative, and I was the villain who wouldn't play nice. Rain hammered the carriage house like 100 small fists. Mrs. O'Neill let herself in with a knock and a thermos of soup, then set a manila folder on the table. "Bank papers," she said, gentle but grim. Inside, a mortgage using the carriage house as collateral. My name scrawled in neat digital cursive. Nissa H. Wrong font, wrong spacing. The kind of tidy tremor a template makes when someone clicks apply signature. Tucked behind it, invoices for consulting. Money funneled straight into Miles's company. The room went still. It wasn't just my benefits they were circling. They were coming for the last thing my grandmother meant for me to keep, the historic district project, the campaign, the gala glow. It all needed fuel, and they decided I was dry kindling. I carried the folder to the window and sat, the prosthetic creaking as I lowered myself onto the bench. Rain tapped the pane, patient and relentless, as if to say, "See it through." Down the hall, the fake orchids didn't move. The slipcovers stayed taut. The for sale sign outside gleamed wet and honest about its intentions. Somewhere a line inside me crossed from hurt to certainty. Whatever this had been, it wasn't a family I could save. It was a fight I had to win. I'd just finished gate training, sweat prickling under the socket, when the exam room door flew open and my parents swept in with Miles at their heels, faces flushed like they'd sprinted through shame. My mother lunged for the window, yanking the curtain shut. "There are reporters down there," she hissed. "This is humiliating." My father dropped his voice into boardroom calm. "This is a family matter. You need to stop before you damage the Harrington brand." I kept my hands flat on my thighs and gave them dates instead of tears. The broken arm they left to make a little league game. The day my husband died in Helmand, and the first call I got from home was about the life insurance payout. Miles snapped, "You just want attention." I nodded to the nurse. "Please escort them out." She stepped between us, firm and professional. The room went still, monitors steady, 3 stunned faces in the doorway, while the balance of power slid, finally, to my side. The chamber was packed, cameras tucked along the back wall, the seal of Charleston gleaming over the dais. When my name was called, I set a thick folder on the lectern. My grandmother's will. The forged mortgage, using the carriage house as collateral. Photos of the staging sign planted in my lawn. Murmurs rippled. Then a city intern, cheeks burning, handed the clerk a thumb drive. Emails from Miles's campaign flashed on a screen. Instructions to steer coverage, paint Nissa as an unstable vet. A gasp, then silence. Next came bank statements from my mother's charity. PR. Entries that were, in reality, a private family party. The council president rapped the gavel. "We are opening a formal ethics investigation into conflicts of interest and misuse of funds." Heads turned, and for once they weren't looking at me like a problem to be managed. The tide in that room shifted, firm, public, undeniable. The storm rolled in with a wall of gray sky and salt spray. a growl that swallowed Charleston whole. By dusk, the streets of the historic district were rivers, palmetto fronds thrashing like whips against the old brick. Power lines sagged, transformers sparked, and the grid went dark in a stuttering wave until only sirens and the roar of wind remained. We had no choice but to move. I climbed into the back of a battered pickup with 3 other vets, the bed stacked with ropes, life vests, and a small John boat lashed down with bungee cords. Rain stung like gravel on my skin. The socket of my prosthetic ached from the pressure, but there was no time to adjust. Sullivan's Island was flooding fast, and word had spread that the elderly were trapped in their homes. The truck lurched through knee-deep water, waves slapping the doors. We passed storefronts with sandbags already swallowed by tidewater, and houses where people waved flashlights from upstairs windows. When we reached the first block of cottages, we unloaded the boat. The wind shoved at us like a living thing. I stumbled twice on the slick pavement, my carbon fiber leg slipping sideways, but the men hauled me up with a grunt and we pushed on. At one cottage, we found Mr. Bailey, a 90-year-old widower who'd been too proud to call for help. The water was waist-high in his living room, furniture bobbing like driftwood. I sloshed in first, nearly losing balance when the prosthetic caught on a rug floating sideways. My heart pounded, not from fear, but from the weight of him leaning against me. Step by step, we maneuvered him into the boat. He was shivering, muttering apologies. "Don't you dare apologize," I said, tightening the life jacket around his shoulders. "You called late, but we came." House by house, we ferried people out, an asthmatic woman clutching her oxygen tank, a pair of retired teachers holding hands, Mrs. O'Neill herself, hair plastered to her face, but eyes still fierce. She pressed my arm when she climbed into the boat. "Told you I wasn't going anywhere without you." Her grip gave me a jolt of strength I didn't know I had left. Meanwhile, across town, my family appeared in a Facebook Live feed. I glimpsed it later on someone's phone during a lull. My brother and parents seated in a luxury hotel ballroom, hurricane shutters rattling faintly behind golden drapes. They wore crisp clothes, voices solemn as they urged donations for relief efforts. Platters of catered food gleamed on a sideboard just behind the camera angle. A mistake some sharp-eyed viewer caught within minutes. The internet erupted. Split-screen comparisons spread like fire. On one side, grainy footage of vets waist-deep in water, hauling frail bodies into boats. On the other, my family's polished broadcast under chandelier light. Comments scrolled in rage. One side rescues, one side poses. This is who deserves our support. Hashtags shifted overnight. Stand with Nissa climbing again, joined by Nissa Harrington hypocrisy. By the time dawn broke over the battered coast, I was soaked through, exhausted, the stump of my leg raw and swollen. But I was standing, steady, surrounded by neighbors who had seen me not as a liability, but as someone who showed up when it counted. For the first time, the mask my family had worn so carefully was gone, not ripped away by me, but peeled back by the truth of their own inaction. In the eye of that storm, battered and aching, I understood. They had lost their stage, and I had finally found my voice. City Hall was standing room only. The storm had passed, but the air still carried the damp tang of seawater and downed trees, a reminder of what we'd all just endured. Reporters lined the back wall with cameras, cords coiled around their ankles. Neighbors filled the benches, some still in rain boots and windbreakers, their faces drawn but eager. At the front sat the city council, a semicircle of stern expressions, microphones glinting under the fluorescent lights. When my name was called, I rose and walked to the podium. The prosthetic clicked softly against the marble floor, steady in its rhythm. I gripped the edge of the lectern, let the silence settle, and then spoke. "The day I lost my husband in Helmand," I said, voice clear. "My mother called to ask about the life insurance payout. Yesterday, they forged my signature to steal my grandmother's house." The words cracked through the chamber like thunder. A ripple of gasps cut through the audience. I lifted the folder I'd carried for weeks and spread its contents across the table for the record. The mortgage application with its neat, fraudulent Nissa H. The leaked emails instructing staff to spin me as an unstable veteran. Bank statements from my mother's charity, where line items labeled PR paid for family galas instead of public good. The clerk passed copies to the council. Chairs creaked as members leaned in, reading with knitted brows. A woman in the second row let out a sharp, "Shame on them," and a few others nodded. One man stood and clapped once before the bailiff hushed him. I kept going. Steady now. They've used my service when it suited them. They've silenced me when it didn't. They thought I was too tired, too broken, to fight. But I'm here, and I won't be erased. The council president leaned into his mic. We have reviewed preliminary findings. Given the evidence, this body is compelled to act. His gavel struck wood. Effective immediately. Miles Harrington is required to withdraw his candidacy for city council. Vivian Harrington is ordered to repay all misappropriated funds from her charitable foundation. And the redevelopment project led by Graham Harrington is suspended pending a full investigation. The words dropped one by one, like stones into water. Murmurs swelled, some cheers breaking through before the gavel silenced them again. I let the relief seep in, but I wasn't finished. "And the carriage house?" I asked quietly. A city attorney stepped forward. "The property is reinstated to your name, Ms. Harrington. It was never legally transferred." My throat tightened. For the first time in months, the ground beneath me felt solid. Then I want to enter into record a lifetime occupancy contract for Mrs. Margaret O'Neill. She's lived there longer than any of us, and she deserves the security my family tried to strip away. Mrs. O'Neill gasped from the front row, her hands trembling as she pressed them to her mouth. The council nodded. The attorney scribbled, and applause broke free despite the gavel's protest. By the time I stepped down, the story was already rewriting itself outside these walls. My family, once the polished face of civic duty, had been stripped of their facade. They walked out of the chamber with heads lowered, shoulders tight, the cameras catching every second of their retreat. I left with nothing flashy, no victory pose, no grin for the cameras, just the sure knowledge that I had reclaimed my voice, my rights, and the home meant for me. They had lost their stage. I had found my ground. And for the first time in years, I wasn't fighting for scraps of recognition. I was standing on my own, whole in a way they would never understand. A year later, the carriage house had settled into something that finally felt like mine. The porch smelled of salt and jasmine, the shutters weathered from storms that had come and gone. Late afternoon light spilled across the backyard, sliding in golden streaks through the branches of the live oaks. I knelt in the dirt where I'd once tripped as a girl, scraped knees raw while no one came running. This time, I pressed a sapling into the earth, a young palmetto, the emblem of South Carolina, tough and unbending. Mud clung to my good foot, thick between my toes, while the prosthetic anchored firm in the soil. I leaned my weight into both, steady, unshaken. The breeze caught the leaves overhead, and I let myself breathe in the sound, the slow whisper of resilience taking root. My phone buzzed on the porch railing. A message glowed across the screen. "Dinner tonight? Family's waiting." For a long moment I stared at the words, at the bait wrapped in civility. Then I turned the phone face down. The choice wasn't bitter, it was clean. From next door, the wind lifted the chimes on Mrs. O'Neill's porch. A bright, tinkling song that cut through the quiet. I smiled without meaning to, feeling the weight of peace settle deeper than any victory speech or headline ever could. The truth had been stripped bare months ago, and with it, the hold my family once had on me. What I had now was stronger. Neighbors who showed up in the storm, friends who answered the call, a community that saw me not as broken, but as whole. I brushed the dirt from my palms and looked at the palmetto, its fragile trunk swaying but unyielding. This was my beginning, not my ending. And as the sun dipped low, I knew with a certainty that warmed me clear through. Peace is the sweetest revenge of all.